inspired, fired up and on the move. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the places and all the races, arm in arm now, upon our feet. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the schools and all the homes, it's time to take it. It's time to take it to the street.
Gonna get militant up in here. Hello, friends, brothers, sisters, activists, everyone across America. Welcome once again to this week's episode of The Call, the program that calls you to direct action, the advocacy, the community organizing, education, and doing whatever it takes for you to do in order to make us have a better world. And today, our guest is one of our friends at the Sierra Club. He does a lot of work across the country and has done a lot of work with us. And we're talking about none other than Dr. Pedro Cruz, who is the acting director for healthy communities at the Sierra Club. How are you doing, Dr. Cruz, or Pedro, as we call each other?
Thank you, Reverend. I'm doing great. Thank you for the invitation today. I'm glad to talk to you even over this Zoom. I would prefer to be in person.
Oh, yes, we look. I wish it was in person too, and I miss our pretty regular trips to Washington D.C. and you and others at the Sierra Club have always been so kind and generous that when I come to D.C., if I need a desk or I need an office, you always say, "Hey, we have one for you, Reverend. Go ahead and do what you need to do," and then we break bread together and always have a great time. And I always remember the great African restaurant that we went to when we were at the United Nations COP in Madrid. So great to be seeing you and talking to you again, but look forward to seeing you in the flesh sometime soon. So,
Me too.
so look, we always start off by having our guests tell people a little about themselves, about how you grew up not on the mainland and a little bit about your education, a little bit about, how you came to do the work that you're doing today. And so just share that with our audience, please.
Oh, yes, of course. I grew up in the Dominican Republic. Uh, I think I started doing organizing and activism in the Dominican Republic when I was a teenager. After that, because economic circumstances, like many other families in Latin America, my family moved and relocated in Puerto Rico, where I went to college. Then I moved to the United States, where also started doing some activism. And the funny thing for me, with just a few months that I arrived and moved to New York City, is that I started a job as an organizer. Um, for me, that was an amazing experience because they were paying me to do the work that if I were doing the Dominican Republic, probably I would get in jail or killed. So for me, that was really ironic. Uh, um, for almost 20 years, or probably for more than 20 years, I've been doing organizing communities around economic justice issue. I've been working with faith organization, with students organization, community-based organization. Most of my work has been around supporting the rights of immigrant workers and organizing in immigrant workers communities, do some international solidarity work around labor rights, specifically with maquiladora workers in Central America and Mexico. But I did a big career jump when I started working around environmental issues, and one of my big motivation was that the challenge that we face as a human race, where we need to change the way that we do things, the change the way that we see the world, if we want to say the world, if we want to still live in this planet and make it livable for all of us. Um, I saw a great opportunity in Sierra Club with this program that I'm still working for, that program that we wanted to marry economic justice and the fight for climate change and environmental justice. And for me, it resonates a lot because usually in the spaces what I used to hear to talk about climate justice, it sounds foreign to me. It sounds something that only people with the expertise in the room were having that discussion. And I didn't see it as my issue. I knew it was bad. I knew it was something that needed to be addressed, but I didn't see it as something that I should be dedicating my time, my energy, and my effort until I see this opportunity where we're marrying economic justice and climate change, and basically saying that the same solution for climate change should be a solution that address historical, economic, and environmental injustice in the US for frontline communities. That's something that I feel very passionate. I feel that it's been a long, long road in terms of fighting disinformation at the government level. But I feel like right now we are in a position that we have the once in a generation opportunity to affect change. We have since we witnessing things that I never think that I would see in my lifetime, like having EJ advisory board in the White House, the president of the United States giving direction to center EJ and climate justice at the center of all the federal policy and all the rulings is something that in my wildest dream, I was expecting to see in my lifetime. So I feel really excited about that. And at the same time, I feel really scared because although when I was organizing toward that, I wasn't prepared as an organizer on what to do once we get it. And I feel like it's a lot of pressure, not just on me, but on the movement in general to get things done now that we had the opportunity. But since I'm moving too fast and the window is very narrow. And what I mean by that, the window being very narrow is that we don't know what will happen in 2022. There may be a new change
Congress.
of power, and that may affect what we can achieve in this presidential cycle.
Right. And so all of those things you talked about, and I agree with you. When, we started working around issues like environmental justice long, long ago, we didn't expect those to, reach the heights that they did to the White House, to the United Nations, even though the United Nations still isn't pushing it as much as we feel they should. But before we jump into the discussion around climate justice, environmental justice, and economic justice, those three key things, and talk a little bit about the infrastructure. The infrastructure bill that's on Capitol Hill now. You mentioned something when you talked about the work that you did. You talked about working with the folks along the Maquiadoro corridor when NAFTA first was instituted. And a lot of people, I think, don't understand that and how that is really, or how that has had an impact on what's going on along the border now, and with so many folks who once had hope of jobs in the United States along that corridor. And can you talk about a little bit about that, please? Because
Yes, those are the first climate immigrants that we're witnessing, although officially we don't call it like that. Nobody wants to leave the place where they were born and grow, and I can witness that. I was pushed out of my country for economic needs more than anything. Um, and and a funny story, before I moved to the United States, that was the same year that a hurricane devastated the island of Puerto Rico, where I was living and working, and I lost my job after that hurricane. So climate has an amazing impact in human mobility that probably we don't take into consideration. Uh, is is something that if we don't address now, is gonna come to hit us harder in the future. As you know, the science of climate, and I'm not gonna go into detail on the science of climate because I'm afraid I may say something that is not accurate, but I understand that if the temperature raise like 1 or 2 degrees on the poles, that will create like sea rises in the tropics. That means it's gonna change the landscape in the tropics and the livelihood of people over there. So people will be so desperate with no other alternative than walking north. That's something that we already been witnessing. We rarely, the media made the connection between climate disaster in that part of the world, the immigration crisis. And when I say the immigration crisis, I'm not just talking about people trying to enter without documents to the United States. I'm also talking about the trauma for people living the places where they feel they belong, but they can no longer live there because life is not sustainable the same way that used to be in the past.
Right. And their hope was taken away because during the Clinton administration, and some of us Agricultural Missions Incorporated visited some of the immigration detention centers a couple of years ago, and we pulled together a report that'll be released with Tuskegee University very soon, and we'll share that out. But when NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, came about, they talked about how this corridor between Mexico and the United States, how all these businesses were going to go there and they were going to go into Central America and it would create all these jobs and manufacturing could leave the US, but it would create jobs. And it didn't happen. And then you got this huge vacuum and people who had a little hope and a few jobs. They weren't good paying jobs, they weren't union jobs. And they went away and into that vacuum stepped the drug cartels. And then you had drought, and then you had the climate impacts. And like you said, because of economic reasons and the lack of hope, people started migrating north, not only in this country, but all over the world. We're seeing a migration as the planet heats up. And so that's where we talk about when tell us a little bit about when we talk about climate justice.
Yeah.
Exactly what that means, because there's an injustice between what's going on in the north, where we're seeing climate impacts, but it's a lot worse in the south, southern part of the planet. And the southern part of the planet is where the brown and the Black people are. So it also has an element of racial injustice, correct?
Yes, yes, and also when you mention this effect of NAFTA, environmental degradation is a big one. Basically, regulations that corporation has in the U.S. and Canada, they are way more lax in Mexico and other parts of the world. I remember especially the textile industry moved south, like south out. Like they used to be all over the United States. And now move, well, no, now I'm talking about 10 years ago. Now it's in China and in other parts of the world. But when it was in Mexico, I remember walking in a small town that the local economy was producing blue jeans. The local river that supplied the water for the community and that supplied water for agricultural purposes, the water was blue because of the dye of the blue jeans. So it's not just the economic impact, it's not just uh, the inequalities that create that push people to immigrate, but also the environmental impact, killing a community so we can have cheap apparel here in the United States.
And you saw, so you can see, because I remember, as you said, the textile mills and those plants used to be in New England. They used to be up north, and that's where the immigrants from Europe were working. And then they unionized and they had benefits and they had to pay more money, and they decided to move south where the right to work states were, where they didn't have to have unions and they didn't have to have benefits. And for a while in the South, and I'm talking about the Southern US, United States, things seemed to prosper. So you had your legs and you had all of these textile and companies or sewing companies that were in the South, and we had the same problem. So there's a big brownfield that's being cleaned up right now in Sherrard, South Carolina, where they had a textile mill. The same problems up in Greenville, and then they decided, hey, we can get even cheaper labor, and we can pollute even more if we move to Mexico and Central America. And then they found out, wow, we can work people for even less money if we move the plants to China and to India and to Africa. And so there's a whole pattern that we see not only in the United States or along the border, but also along, when it comes to race. And so when you talked about the climate impacts, and the pollution and all of those things that you're seeing in other countries, we see that there's a parallel, the same things happening in poor and people of color communities in the United States. And so when there's pollution, there's also health impacts. So we understand that you're also directing the Sierra Club's Healthy Communities initiative. So why don't you tell us about the Healthy Communities Initiative and how they all kind of tie in together?
Yeah, the Healthy Communities Initiative has been around 5 years already. And it started originally with implementation plans of Obama's Clean Power Plan. Basically, at that point, what we were doing was exploring how to implement the Clean Power Plan in a way that is equitable and in a way that we make sure that impacted EJ communities will reap the benefit of such a plan. Unfortunately, you know the rest of the history when President Trump was elected, and we need to change directions in the way that we were doing things because the Clean Power Plan was going nowhere. I'm really happy with the new change of administration, where the Clean Power Plan is too little of a demand for the current circumstances, that we can be more ambitious and ask even for more. But something that touched all of our teens' life last year was the combination, or the triple combination, of an economic crisis, a global pandemic, the uprise for racial justice in the United States. And at that moment, we sat and reflect what direction we want to take in this campaign. This is what I call one of the best cosmetic changes I've done in my life, because basically we decided we're gonna keep doing exactly the same thing that we've been doing for the last couple of years. The only difference that we're gonna be very intentional in how we call our work and how we represent our work and how we center in our work. And that means that in the past, we used a code language for our work because that's the culture that we were living. Basically, we were used to say, oh, we work with frontline communities. We were with first-line communities. And now we are very intentional that we want that the fruit of our labor, the fruit of our advocacy, it goes on the betterment of Black communities and being very intentional on calling it Black and being Black centered. Uh, we have two areas that we focus our work, probably I would say three. One of them is energy justice. On the energy justice area, we partner with local partners in around 5 or 6 states where we run the numbers and we notice that the Black population, because of redlining, institutional racism, they spend a higher percentage of their income paying for utility bills. Uh, the houses on those communities are older stock of housing, not in the best of the conditions. Therefore, they consume more energy. Therefore, they have to invest more money on that. So we are directly working with local state level utility commissions and also at the federal level for more funding to be allocated for those programs that address the issue of energy burden. But not only that, but also being very mindful to remind that the root of this problem is racism. Addressing this, by addressing this, you're dismantling a little bit the racist structure that the society has been built. So that's one aspect of the work that we're doing. The other aspect of the work that we're doing is connect, I would say it's like intersection between climate justice and environmental justice. Basically, we are connecting with local partners, talking about resiliency and the needs to organize in order to increase the level of equitability on resiliency policy. Like right now, although there have been changes, the federal government disaster response is not the most equitable. Communities, when there is a hurricane, when there is a fires, all communities are impacted the same, but not all communities were at the same place when a hurricane hit. Therefore, the government should be trying to make a balance in order to be more equitable how they respond to disaster. The other problem is something that we learned with the Trump administration is that disaster can be politicized for partisan purposes. And specifically, when you see the rate of funding to help Florida and Texas, states that are traditional Republicans, in comparison with help going to Puerto Rico, where they don't even vote for the president of the United States. That's one of the best examples of how you can politicize this. That's an area where we're focusing our energy. In terms of environmental justice, part of the reckoning, the racial reckoning that we're going through at the national level, but also institution, big or relatively big old institutions like Sierra Club that have been around for 130 years almost, is this conversation about what is our place on EJ spaces when we are not an EJ organization. Sometimes funders perceive us of being an EJ organization and expecting us to fulfill that role of regranting to EJ group when that's shouldn't be our role. So we are in a moment where we go into this deep conversation with some key stakeholder on the organization, where we are revising and having a conversation how we're defining EJ work for Sierra Club.
Let me unpack because that's a lot. So
I know.
let me unpack some of it, okay? So we know Sierra Club was formed back in the 1800s and is actually a conservation organization, not an environmental justice organization. But like you said, funders for, money attracts money. So the bigger environmental and conservation organizations that have these huge multi-million-dollar budgets and have a lot of staff and that sort of stuff. The funders seem to like to give money to them. That's a whole nother. But let me try to impact some of the connections that you made for our audience. So you talked about environmental justice and how that is seeped in racism. So we know that because of racism, and you mentioned redlining, right? That Black, brown, indigenous communities, usually because the banks is called redlining from the banks, they would only give loans and have houses built in areas that were environmentally vulnerable, close to waterways, close to floodplains, in low-lying areas, those sorts of things. And then also a lot of the housing that's available even today for poor people and people of color are older houses with lead pipes, and the houses are not in good shape. So you're heating and cooling the outdoors. So you're already poor, but you're also paying more money on your utilities. And then on top of that, we also have, like you said, from healthy communities, because 80% of Black people live within 30 miles of an interstate highway or polluting facility. You have the environmental injustice because most polluting facilities are located in poor communities or people of color communities, which means that all of that pollution and the air emissions causes health problems, right? So that's why you're bringing together. And as the planet heats up and there's more greenhouse gases, we're seeing more and more hurricanes and torrential rains and extreme heat and all of these climate impacts that impact poor people and people of color more because they live in these flood zones. They live in these houses that are not in good shape. And so when the storms come, they're impacted more. They have more damage in their communities. And then you also mentioned that because the funding is also based on politics, and if you live in a community or a state that the person in charge, if they belong to, if they live in a red state, you mentioned Texas and as one, then they tend to get more funding than someone who lives in a state where people primarily vote for the other party, or in the case of Puerto Rico, or the U.S. Virgin Islands, where they really have no congressional representation or can't vote at all, right? So I just wanted for our audience to see clearly the connections that you're talking about, because one of the things we talked about with our Justice First tour, the Sierra Club partnered with us and helped to make that happen, is that all of this stuff is intersectional and connected. And one of the things that hurts us as we try to change things is that everybody thinks that they're in their own little corner. I work on climate justice. I don't work in environmental justice. I work with conservation. I don't work with environmental justice or economic justice. I don't work with energy justice and energy burden and those sort of things. So look, I just want to unpack that because you were throwing a lot at our audience. You know what I
I
mean?
know.
And I just want to clarify because we may have some people who this is all new to them, and so I just want to kind of put that out. So, um, energy. Let's talk a little bit more about energy justice and what they talk about energy democracy, um, because those are there's some parts of this movement that's dealing with climate and environment where we talk some really good things
Mhm.
and you don't really see them happening. And we can talk about some of the funding that goes along with that. So when we
Mhm.
talk about it, energy justice, you talk some about that, and energy democracy talks about people being able to choose what sort of energy they want. So, talk a little bit about that, about energy justice, energy democracy,
Mhm.
and what that, how important that is.
Yes, energy justice and energy democracy is something that I feel extremely hopeful about and excited about because uh, since national organization has been doing the organizing to move us to a transition to 100% clean energy, the focus had been a bit about decarbonizing the grid. So we don't produce more CO2 as we generate energy to have power in our houses. When you talk about energy justice and energy democracy, uh, you're saying that the problem is beyond climate change, that there's other items that need to be addressed, and it's all about decision-making power and education of the public of where the power come from, as a way to protect not only the environment, but also to protect our pockets. uh, 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 there's have been like a move of saying that government doesn't work, that the private sector can do it better. And in that process, we had this gigantic energy company that cross state lines and thinking of the dominions of the world, the Duke Energies of the world. Uh, and that's not necessarily better. And when we're talking about energy democracy, we're talking about uh, literally giving power back to the people, that the people have an understanding where the energy is coming from, that not only have that understanding, but also be active participants in what kind of energy they want to get. Uh, there is opportunity with this push on advocacy for clean energy to create decentralized grid to solar farms or even rooftop solar, uh, where people have control more than consumers of energy. They are producers of energy because the energy is being produced in land that they own. Uh, we moving in that direction, but that's only one aspect. Uh, and again, I feel really hopeful and excited that that's a big chunk of the advocacy that is happening right now, because it's the kind of thing that we don't think about that much. Uh, Something that I do every time that I have an opportunity to do a presentation and talk to a larger group of people, my icebreaker question is always, so do you know what is in your electricity bill? Can you tell me that you understand line by line what is there? People just look each other. I got a usually a good laugh, because people try to guess, like, I don't know, I just see how much I owe and I send a check and that's it. Not understanding that the livelihood of our communities sometimes is impacted for how we pay that bill and how the utility company invests that money. I just found out recently that in some states, uh, communities overwhelmingly wants clean energy, and this is regardless of your political party or affiliation. You want clean energy because it's cheaper and it's better for the environment where you live. Uh, in the utility bills, they pay in privately owned utility companies for them to use the dues that you pay into them to advocate against clean energy. That's ridiculous, but that's something that is happening. And because of lack of education and for lack of, uh, I would say, fiscalization from the media and from the public utility commissions, that's something, that's a fact that not many people know about it.
Right. So some people, like you said, for example, when you look at your bill, people don't understand, a lot of folks don't understand that depending when you use appliances actually impacts what your bill is. So you have your peak hours where you actually pay more money for using kilowatt hours, and then you have certain times of the day when you it actually costs you less money than other times when it costs you a little more, and then peak hours like 5 o'clock and a little later, where you actually are paying even more money to wash your clothes, etc. But where what I'm looking at also is I'm also looking at the aspect of energy democracy. So we look at people being able to, um, poor people are not able to get rooftop solar like people who have more money. For example, because of tax credits. So if I owe money in taxes and I decide to put solar panels on my house, I can actually I can defray the cost of what it costs me to put those panels on my house with my tax credits. So maybe it'll cost $50,000 for me to put solar panels on my house so that my whole house is solar. But if I never owe money, and for low income people, they don't look for a notice from the government saying they owe taxes. They look for a refund check. And found that some companies that are not very scrupulous will tell people, hey, it costs $30,000, $50,000 to put these solar panels on your house. But with your tax credits over 10 years, it'll only cost you $9,000. But if you're not eligible for tax credits, then you just put yourself deeper in debt. So one of the things when we talk about energy democracy, people being able to choose whether they want their energy to come from wind or solar or coal or wind turbines, is how do we make it more affordable for people? How do we have government intervention? So if I put solar on my house, maybe I'll never owe the federal government and the state money, so I'll never be able to use tax credits. But what about rebates or something else that low income people be able to choose?
Something that you're forgetting to add in that equation is renters.
Right.
A big chunk of the population, especially low income people, are renters. Many of the policy in place at the national and state level are directed to homeowner. So in terms of equity, any kind of equity on access to clean energy should take into consideration renters. Um, and as you mentioned, there should be a specific policy measure that make sure that their equitability uh, and the access to clean energy. Uh, that's that's a big issue because as you were talking about, if you have the money to put up front to put solar panels in your rooftop, you just do it because you have the money. So there should be tax incentive for people to own their own solar energy, but also making sure that when there's distributed microgrid coming from solar farms, that people that live in low-income community are not only the first to be benefit from this, but from the beginning be part of the planning process of how that energy is going to be getting to them.
Right, right. That is a challenge. So, like in the city where we're headquartered, 41% of the population are renters. And so one of the solutions that people put forward for that is having community solar farms where people connect. And we think that's a great solution, for both homeowners and renters. And the Whitney M. Slater Foundation, one of our partner organizations, was very instrumental in working with Duke to have one built in South Carolina. And I was excited about it. And then I found out, wow, once you connect to the community solar farm, you're locked in with that utility company. Just like right now, if you don't have a choice about who your utility company is. If you buy a house,
Mhm.
it's connected to Duke or Dominion or whatever, and if you sell the house, the next person, that's their utility company, and the same thing with the community solar farm. And so while that's a solution for renters and homeowners who can't afford to put solar on their homes, what happens when you decide, hey, I don't want to be connected anymore. So it's very challenging, and there's a lot going on. And one of the things that we have that's a good possible solution now is what's going on with the infrastructure bill. And so let's talk a little bit about
Mhm.
current infrastructure bill that passed the Senate, but is currently being debated in the House, and people are saying that there's some really good things about it, but then there's also some challenges. I see you smiling already. Some challenges with that, and also some challenges with Justice Ford.
Yes, definitely the infrastructure plan and the amount of money dedicated to it is a step in the right direction, but also an extremely arbitrary one. And specifically, and this is outside, well, it's related to energy, but also to water. Uh, the plan that was voted by the Senate uh, it doesn't cover the full need to switch lead pipes for one that is non-lead and that will protect our community for exposure to the pollutant that is killing us, basically. They only put in 25% of the need to cover for that. At the same time, in that package, they put in a provision where they're going to be spending money to do an assessment of the lack or the loss of employment because of the pipelines that the Biden administration is, the gas and oil pipeline that the Biden administration is stopping. Uh, that would make you think that, I'm guessing the Republicans put that there, that they care about workers and about job. I think that's an ironic contradiction because the same skills and the same workers that you need to lay pipelines on the gas and oil sector is the same workers with the same skills that you need to change the lead water pipelines. So it's hypocrisy at an extremely high level. Um, Also, uh, I feel that it doesn't go far enough um, on terms of defining uh, what EJ communities are and how they're going to be benefiting and how they're going to be uh, bringing their input, making sure that 40% of that investment goes to those communities. But again, it's something positive. It's something that we hope during the reconciliation process and something that the House has been saying. Uh, they want to put more meat on or more money, literally, outside the infrastructure program to make sure that low-income communities are protected and are included in that program. That is not the same infrastructure vision that we have for the past 100 years in the Roosevelt years to the present, that basically is protecting the white working class because that's the class that count. That's the class that would benefit from the jobs created in this, historically in any kind of infrastructure plan. So that's something that need to be addressed, and hopefully there would be some sort of push from the House to make that happen, to help to improve that infrastructure plan that is, as I mentioned before, is good, but it's not good, it's not enough when you see historically the hunger in our communities foresee this happening.
Absolutely. And so we're running out of time. So, but what I want you to do before we go is one, tell people what they can do to influence our policymakers in DC or in the
Mhm.
states to make the right decisions that will help us have healthier communities, have environmental justice, climate justice,
Mhm.
energy justice, etc., and how they might be able to reach you at the Sierra Club.
Yes, now that the Congress is not in session, that is in recess, that doesn't mean that many of them go on vacation. Usually they go back to their district. Is like for any citizen to visit their district office and let them know that you want an infrastructure plan that is fully funded and an infrastructure plan that include all those good things that we want to see, and all racial equity problem that we mentioned today to be addressed through legislation. You can do that to setting in district office, in district meetings. It could be through your local civic group, through your local church, that you set a meeting in district. And usually, my experience, elected officials pay more attention to those meetings than when you come to DC and meet with them. Because when you come to DC, it's about them showing you their big, beautiful office in Capitol Hill and impress you with that. Um, when you have those in district meeting, is you reminding them that you voted for them and they keeping their job depend on them listening and addressing the issues that you bring into their office.
Mhm. Absolutely. And how can they contact you if people are interested in contacting you around healthy communities and
Yes, the fastest way to reach me, and I'm kind of like feeling old school in that sense, is by email. Like nobody use email anymore. Usually use other text messages and all that. That for me, that technology sometimes is challenging. You can reach me at Pedro, Pedro dot Cruz, Cruz at sierraclad.org.
okay. Thank you so much, Pedro, Dr. Cruz. So, Dr. Pedro Cruz, who is acting director for healthy communities with the Sierra Club, has been our guest on this week's edition of The Call. And we hope that you have been not only educated, but that you enjoyed the information and the knowledge that he poured out to us, and that it will help you to answer the call, to take direct action, to promote advocacy, to educate others in your family and your community, and to also impact policy. So until next week, this time, you have been listening to the call, and if you wish to reach us, you can do so by emailing us at newalphacdc@gmail.com. Once again, newalphacdc@gmail.com. And so until next week, this time, remember to answer the call. Thank you very much.
From all the places and all the races.